Thank you all for calling into this webinar. Lots of things are different these days, doing lots of things online compared to in person, but some things stay the same, and I think it's really important. And one of those things is that I think we should always do a territorial acknowledgement when we begin things. So I know some of us are calling in from different places, but the territory that I'm on and that our diocese is, at least our synod office is based on, is Mi'kma'ki, which is the traditional and present day territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And the treaty of this land is the Peace and Friendship Treaty. Oh, Laura just joined for one second. So the Peace and Friendship Treaty isn't a treaty that's about a transfer of land, but was an acknowledgement and kind of an establishment of guidelines for what was then a new relationship, and continues today as an ongoing relationship between Indigenous and settler people in this place. So even in these times, I think it's really important that we reflect on what that relationship means in your context, and how you can live into that to be a force for reconciliation where you are, especially in this month of June, which is Indigenous Heritage Month. So with that said, welcome to this webinar. I'm really glad that that you folks have taken some time tonight to talk about this important work. So I'll introduce you to the folks on the panel, the folks on your screen, and tell you what each of them are up to. So I'm Allie. I'm the Youth and Family Ministry Coordinator for the Diocese of Nova Scotia and PEI. Usually in the summer, I am kind of the lead staff person for a kind of traveling day camp program called Community Roots. And Community Roots is a partnership between the diocese and parishes. So we have a staff team that goes from place to place, but we work intentionally with parishes in the lead up to train volunteers and kind of build capacity within the parish to someday run their own day camp without staff support from the diocese. So that's not happening in the traditional way this summer. And it looks more like enabling you folks to do things where you are. So the ministry kind of continues in this new way. Below me on the screen is, I hope it's the same for all of you, I don't know, is Laura Bird. Laura is our Prince Edward Island expert for tonight. I don't know if you have like a fun, no one knows what I'm about to say this, if you have like a fun fact or something that you want to share.
I once was a roller skating waitress.
That's amazing, and I have a lot of questions, but probably this is the moment to ask them, so I'll send you an email later. So Laura's here to kind of speak to some of the particularities of what's going on in PEI. So if you're on PEI, you're going to do some ministry there this summer, and you maybe have some questions about restrictions right now, Laura knows things that I don't. Next to Laura is the Reverend Kristen McKenzie, who is the rector of the parish of Liscombe and Port Beckerton. Sometimes I reverse them, but I think that's the right order. Kristen is going to be kind of our moderator for tonight, so I've got the content that I'll talk us through. But Kristen will keep an eye on the chat stuff, and we'll kind of field questions as they come in and direct them to the appropriate people. What's your fun fact?
I don't know how to rollerblade, so I could not be a rollerblading waitress. I did get a pair of roller skates for Easter one year, and then there was a snowstorm, and then I gave it up. That was my career in roller skating.
I think that's more of an unfun fact, but
not very fun, no. Maybe I'll learn during quarantine.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
time.
And our last panelist is Hillary Richardson. Hillary has been a staff person for Community Roots for the past 2 summers, but actually that has nothing to do with why she's a panelist on this, although might have some input on questions that you have. So the Connect team is a little task group for our diocese that plans trainings. And Hillary's part of that team, and webinars are going to be more a part of our life and work. So Hillary is on as a panelist just to see the back end of how this works. So that's who we are. If you want to pop a little message in the chat and make sure it goes to, I think you can set it so that it goes to all panelists and attendees. Say who you are and where you're at. Oh, sorry, Hillary. I'm going to ask you your fun fact. I'm just going to finish saying this. I'm so sorry for forgetting that. So attendees, if you want to put a little thing about who you are and where you're at in the chat, that would be really awesome. Hillary, what's your fun fact?
I didn't have a fun fact other than the fact that I've never put on a pair of rollerblades. So, you know, maybe I'll have to pop down to the Oval if they're, you know, if that's available at sometime this summer and try it out. But it's also super cool to see so many people that we've worked with over the last couple summers popped in today. I'm super excited about that. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Okay, thank you, Hillary. Sorry for forgetting to ask you that and then putting you on the spot when you didn't have a thing. Okay, so just a couple Zoom things that will be helpful for you to know. On the bottom of your screen, there should be a little speech bubble. It says chat. You can click that and that's where you can put in chat things if you have a comment or something like that. If you have a question for me or Laura or Hillary or Kristen about that Christmas with the rollerblades, the best way to make sure that that gets seen and answered is to submit it through the Q&A, which is a couple icons down from the chat. That kind of pops up in a different area and just will help make sure it doesn't get lost in the chat if the chat is really hopping with activity. So one other thing that I wanted to say is that this webinar is being recorded and I'll upload it once we're done. And then I'll send around the link to that, as well as links to some of the resources that I'll talk about later. It's a really hard adjustment for me doing these webinars when I do trainings in person. When I'm done talking about all the things you need to know, like where the washrooms are and that kind of thing, I trust you know where the washroom is where you are. I always say, does that make sense? Do you have any questions? But it's weird to ask that in this context. I guess you could tell Kristen in the chat if that makes sense. So Kristen, if there are questions or things that come up as we go, I trust your judgment about whether things can kind of get held for the questions later, or if it's like a clarifying thing in the moment, if it's worth interrupting me to ask. But I think we will dig into some stuff. So I had a poll going that might have been done before some of you joined in, but just to kind of get a feel for how many of you had day camps planned for this summer. And 4 of the people who answered the poll said that they did and 5 didn't. So that's really helpful to know for some things that we'll talk about in a bit. So I thought we could start the content piece with talking about why we do day camps. I think it's always an important place to start, to ask yourself why you want to do just about anything. Ministries in particular, I think it's really important. There are lots and lots of reasons to do a day camp, but at the heart of it, I hope that your reasons include a desire to build relationships with and to provide support for the young people in your community and to help them learn more about God. I think that that connection piece, the building relationship and the providing support for young people in this weird time is especially important, but is always an important part of this. Even if you've been doing day camps forever and think you have a really solid grasp on why you do them, I think it's really worth taking a bit of time to do that reflection. Because then you can call back to that for every decision that you make, every choice that you make in planning whatever it is you do this summer. If you center it on that why, I think it will help you immeasurably. Undoubtedly, there are going to be new challenges and new kinds of frustrations that you face as you figure out how to navigate restrictions or online things, or how do you connect with people when you can't connect with people. But if you have close at mind why you're doing it, it won't make things any easier necessarily, but it makes it easier to stay committed when you remember what this important work is all about. Okay. I keep forgetting to scroll down as I talk, so I apologize for all of the times that I'm likely to do that tonight. So we'll talk a little bit about some possible formats for this year. I think it makes sense to start with the possibility of what you can do in person. So I'll talk about Nova Scotia a little bit first, and then Laura, after I'm done, if you can just give a bit of what's up in PEI right now and what a day camp might look like if it were to start tomorrow. So restrictions are still pretty tight in Nova Scotia. We're allowed to gather indoors in groups of 10, still distanced, and encouraged to wear masks. And outdoors, I think you can do groups of 15 distanced, masks, the whole thing. So that's pretty limiting. I think if you're used to doing a small camp, the numbers might make sense, but certainly it's going to be really challenging in doing activities to maintain that distance the whole time. Not impossible, but some challenges there for sure. And daycares are opening in about a week. But I haven't heard any clear anything about day camps. Maybe there have been some things and I've just missed them, but yeah, nothing in particular for this specific thing yet. So just following the general restrictions and guidance from good old Dr. Strang would be the plan for right now. Laura, what's up on your gentle island?
Well, we can have day camps functioning right now.
Great.
And the government has actually published some really good, clear guidelines on what can happen. So right now we are in phase 3 in PEI, which means that we can have indoor gatherings of 15. That would include staff and campers, and social distancing measures need to be in place the same way it is for any type of gathering, even with a daycare or a day camp guideline. And they've actually printed out a really good list of suggested activities that are permitted with modifications and that are not permitted. So the PEI government website has some really clear guidelines on how many people can be in an indoor or an outdoor space, recommended activities that are permitted, and then ones that are absolutely not permitted. And a lot of the work that I think will happen with day camps in PEI will be the need to do the groundwork first. I think it's gonna, a lot of time when you're planning a day camp, it's your content that you spend a lot of time on. And I think you would probably have to devote half of that content time to really looking at the planning of your physical space, how to sanitize, the wearing of masks, just all of those detail things. And you are required to actually file an operational plan. There's a template that's available, and it's pretty clear guidelines for you to follow. That's really well set up. So even if you don't have one in Nova Scotia, pop over to the PEI government page because it gives some really good things to think about. I don't think that Nova Scotia will be that different in terms of some of the physical restrictions and needs, and it might get you started. And that's all.
Thank you, Laura. I just pulled up on my computer, so I'll do a quick screen share to just show you, because they are really excellent resources, regardless of where you are. So, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. Yeah. So this is the website. So you can see where it has day camp activities, and then grouped by level of contact, sport or activity, ones that are permitted, ones permitted with modifications, and some that are not permitted at all. And there's just a ton on here.
And there's actually some good links to it. So it'll link you to the operational plan. It'll link you to the questions that you need to ask with the families and the kids before they come in. So honestly, it's there. It's a template. It's useful to use. And I would suggest, honestly, if you're running a day camp with volunteer staff, that you have, I don't know if people are doing full day or half day, but if you have someone that is just devoted to that as a volunteer, it could be a really new and interesting ministry for someone, just to make sure that the sanitizing's happening, following the kids around to, not to police them. I don't like that, but you know, to wipe down the surfaces. Somebody with their spray bottle and their, you know, rag and their mask or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And not to get too into the weeds of it, but if you have one person who's designated to look out for those things, I think that helps it feel less like policing. Because then everybody else is free to just be present without needing to worry. When was the last time that table got wiped? That kid just touched it. Who's going to clean it? If someone is just managing that, no one else needs to worry. Okay. And no one is allowed to go to PEI. You have to make a special application. So I know it sounds really great to just zip over there and run your camp there, but that's against the rules right now. Okay, so I've got 3 non-in-person possibilities for how to do day camp this summer to talk about a little bit. The first is entirely online. The second is entirely offline, but separately. And the third is a combination of online and independent in-person stuff. So to do online only things, and I have notes. I thought about putting them all on a like a presentation, doing a share of them, but I decided against that. So sorry if that would have been your preference, but I have the notes and I'll send them around with the links. Okay, so online only. You can do things completely online with, you can post videos on Facebook or do Facebook Live or Zoom or any video hosting site or any kind of video conferencing system. So like YouTube or GoToMeeting, those kinds of things can all work. If you do a live thing, especially if it's using a video conferencing thing, it's really important to be mindful of what's going on with your people and what time works best for them. Just like if you're doing a day camp thing in person. If kids are in daycare all day, probably an evening thing is going to be better. If kids in your community aren't going to daycare and parents are busy during the day with work at home stuff, then maybe during the day is a really valuable time for you to offer something to engage kids when their parents are busy. But you know your people, you know your context, so ask the questions that you need to make sure that what you're offering is what works for them. So a couple of kind of pros and cons for doing pre-recorded or live videos. So this is not the video conferencing thing. This is just a video on Facebook or YouTube or that kind of thing. So pros is that you're better able to control the content because for the most part, it's just going to be you talking or you and someone else or whatever format you chose to do it. Another advantage is that you can edit your video. If you do it pre-recorded, if you do it live, you can't edit it. It also is much easier in terms of safer church stuff. There is still some work to it, for sure. So there should at the very least be a conversation with the rector and wardens or whoever's involved with youth and family ministry stuff in your parish. Have a conversation about how what's posted online gets screened for appropriateness. Who's allowed to be part of the online stuff? Does stuff have to be checked out in advance? Those kinds of conversations are really, really important. And another advantage is that it can be accessible to campers at any time. So if you're if you're doing YouTube videos with kind of camp content, once it's up, they can just watch it whenever works for them. A couple of challenges or disadvantages. The first is that there's very limited potential for interaction. So if you do a Facebook Live video, for example, people can comment and you can kind of engage them in that way. But if it's a pre-recorded thing, then you might be able to interact with people after, but in the moment you can't really. And I mentioned as a pro for pre-recorded videos that you can edit them, but it also is kind of a con that you can edit the videos because it can be incredibly time consuming. So if you are a bit of a perfectionist, this is a really important thing to take really good care in balancing. Because it can just take hours trying to get every single thing just right. And that's not the way things are when we're in person. So I don't think it's fair to hold ourselves to that kind of perfection standard in this time. If you stumble over a word, I've made like 10 mistakes so far in this, and I'm not going to edit them before I put it up because I know that once I start editing, I'm going to want to fix every single thing and then I'll never sleep again. So just check in with yourself if you do edit to make sure that you're not being too hard on yourself. Okay, video conferencing, so like Zoom. Some pros to doing that is that there's way more potential for interaction. I know in this webinar format, there's not as much, but in a Zoom meeting, you can see people, you can talk with one another. You can connect with campers and to some extent their parents in a really direct and immediate way. And it allows campers opportunity to connect with one another. I have two nieces who are 5 and 6. And every time I talk to them, they tell me how much they miss their friends. And when I talk to them in non-COVID time, I rarely hear the same friend name more than once. There's a couple really good friends that they have, but they just miss connecting with other kids. So if you do a conferencing kind of thing, it offers that. That has nothing to do with teaching them about the stories of the Bible in a direct way. But that's a really tangible way that we can care for young people in our communities, which I think is a pretty indirect way to teach them about the love of God by creating space for them to be cared for. Another advantage to video conference style is that it's pretty easy to have other leaders be part of it. Like they can just connect in from their home without needing to fuss about with recording their own video and sending it to you and splicing them together or whatever. They can just join in. The challenges to a video conferencing style. Safe for Church stuff is a bit more complicated, but it's not insurmountable. So just 2 things that I wanted to note for this is that all leaders should be screened in the same way that they would be for an in-person camp. Lots of the risks get eliminated when you shift everything online. We're not going to share coronavirus with one another doing things this way. But there are still other risks that are present, and it's important for your leaders in this situation to know what those are and know how to navigate things as they come up. In any situation where there can be people who are vulnerable, it's really important to take care, and that's this situation for sure. And along with that, there should always be at least 2 leaders with any group of campers. So if you're all in a Zoom meeting, 2 is great. If you choose to use breakout rooms as part of that, you just need to make sure that you have sufficient leaders to be able to be present in all of those. This is a question that always comes up for in-person day camp, so I'm sure would be one for online ones too, is do parents count as leaders? And I think that they can, but you shouldn't assume that a parent is going to be a leader. They certainly will need that training that I talked about. But also, if they're going to be a leader, there needs to be a commitment to staying there. You can't be a parent who is working their day job in the background, kind of keeping half an ear on what's happening. And for video conferencing, I have one of those kind of pro, kind of con things. So for pre-recorded stuff, I said that it was easier to kind of control the content. With a video conferencing thing, it's easier for things to go off track or take unexpected turns. But I'm guessing that all of you who've done ministry with children, with young people, with just about anyone, I'm guessing that you know that sometimes when things go off track, it's a lot and it's not great. But other times, that's when the most amazing things happen. So, one of those things to balance, the great joys and the great challenges. Okay, so that was online. Lots of options, lots of things to think about there. The next one is the entirely offline, but doing everything separate. So this could look like preparing packages to be distributed to all campers with activities to do at home. So maybe arts and crafts, science experiments, stories, stuff from the Bible, all kinds of possibilities. A couple pros to this style is that assembling and distributing the kits is the only work involved. You might want to do some follow-up stuff after, but assembling, and once you've assembled them and distributed them, it can be done. Another is that it involves parents in the faith formation of young people. I think that I should have listed this first because I think it actually is the most important. The single biggest factor in determining whether or not a young person will grow up to be a person of faith is whether or not their parents showed them that it mattered. If a kid goes to Sunday school every Sunday all year, that's 52 hours of time at the most that they're spending with their Sunday school teachers learning about God. But they're with their parents way more than that. That 52 hours at the most pales in comparison to the time that parents spend modeling what life looks like for their kids. So when parents are actively involved in the work of faith formation, it sticks in a different way. So I think that's a huge advantage to creating the space for this stuff to happen at home. It also allows campers and families to do things at their own pace. So maybe you put together 5 hours worth of content that you imagine will happen Monday through Friday in 1 week. But if that's not what works for a family, they've got the resources. They can space things out as they need. Maybe they want to do it all in one day. Maybe Friday is a day that they all spend together. So every Friday they do a piece of this. But it allows that flexibility without you needing to manage it at all, which is really great. A couple of challenges. Assembling the kits can be tedious, depending on how many things you put in them. It might be something that's too hard for just one person to do. So having more than one person come together to do it involves all of those good hygiene practices, distancing, all those things that we kind of talked about a bit before. I put that as a con, but I love that part of doing this kind of thing. Like taking stacks of 10 things and creating kits is just magic to me. Another challenge is that it really is quite limited interaction between you as a leader and campers. There are ways, like you can follow up. You can include a little letter to each camper in it. You can follow up after. You could call to check in. But it certainly would take some creativity to make that happen. Another challenge is that it does put the work on parents, many of whom are time-strapped and really burnt out right now. I think it's getting a bit better for some parents, at least in Nova Scotia, now that school is over and they don't feel the pressure of being a teacher as well as being a parent, as well as in lots of cases being someone who's working out of the home or in the home. But again, it's complete coincidence that the last one on my cons list is always one of these gifts and challenge pieces. But my parish did little outdoor explorer kits for kids in our community. And for sure, when we distributed them, we heard from some people like, this looks really great, but I just don't know how I can do this. I just don't have the time. But we also heard from people who said, this is really great because I am running out of ideas. My kid just wants to do stuff all day and I can only come up with so much. So maybe it does put work on some parents, but it also takes some of the work off of engaging with their kids in hopefully a fun and creative way. So that's entirely offline, but separate. The last of the three was combination of online and in person. So hopefully the name of this option is pretty self-explanatory, and it encompasses most of what I've already talked about. There are endless possibilities for the specifics of what this could look like. So I think that's a really great thing about this way of doing it, is that you could do exactly what works best for where you are and for your people. Maybe you do a video conference each morning at a set time and then break to do activities whenever works throughout the day, come back together later in the day, or just talk about what you did the next day. Or maybe you have pre-recorded videos that people can watch whenever and then do activities after. Or I don't know, the possibilities really are endless for what this could look like. So whatever format you decide to go with within all of those things, including if you choose to do in-person stuff, it's really important to be realistic about the resources that you have. So resources in terms of time, people, and money. And make sure that whatever you do, that you plan something that makes sense within all of those things. If all that you do is a kit with one craft, but it's usable, well done, meaningful, all those good things, doesn't burn you out, doesn't burn other volunteers out putting it together, that will be much more worthwhile than burning yourself out, burning all your people out, maxing out all of your resources, putting together a not that great week full of online stuff, full of things to do independently, full of things that are flexible and things that are fixed. We're in a pandemic, and people get that things aren't going to be the same as in non-pandemic times. I don't think that that gives us a free pass to just do nothing, to say, oh well, too bad. But it certainly gives us the space to give ourselves a little bit of grace. You don't have to roll out the perfect, best thing. If you've done camp for 1,000 years in your church, it doesn't need to be exactly as everything as it always has been. People will totally understand. And in my experience, as someone who helped put together those Outdoor Explorer kits, and as someone who participates in online stuff with my baby that we normally would do in person, I'm just so grateful to have something offered. And that's what I heard from lots of people who got the kits. Like, they know that things have to be different, but they're just glad that something is being offered. One other thing that you might want to give some consideration to in all of this is how you can make this not just a day camp for kids, but a sort of family day camp. I think this will help alleviate some of the extra pressure on parents as well. If it's something that is really engaging for all ages, and is fun for parents to be part of, is fun for older teenage siblings to be part of. It's not simple to do that for sure, but I think it's worth giving some time to think about what you might be able to do. Most of the resources that I'm going to talk about are kid camper focused, but there's room in all of it to expand and be creative, to find ways to engage a whole family or a whole range of ages. Okay. My next thing is to plan for changes to happen. So as you know, and as we've talked about a little already, restrictions due to COVID-19 are changing all the time. So it's important to do some thinking about how your plans might change as restrictions change. Depending on your particular situation, I guess this really applies more so if you're planning to do an online thing, or one of the things that I talked about, it would be different if you're planning to do an in-person thing at this point. You might decide that even if restrictions lift a little, you'll just continue with the plan as it is. And that's totally okay. Even if you're allowed to do day camps, even if you have the best guidelines going forward, you might just decide we're gonna do it online. We're still gonna do our distributing kits. That's totally okay and a really valid choice. Or you may decide that if restrictions do change to allow you to do something more in person, that you have the resources, that you have the people, that you have the time to make that happen. If you think that that might be what you lean towards, doing something in person if you can, you might want to have some things loosely lined up as you pull your plans together. That way, as things change, you aren't scrambling for everything. But I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend setting a cutoff date for changing your plan. Our restrictions tend to change on Friday in Nova Scotia. So if restrictions change on Friday and you're all set to start your camp on Monday, and that Friday they say, day camps are a go. They're not gonna say this, but all restrictions are off, do whatever you want. You're not gonna have sufficient time to get things together to make it happen. It sure would be great, but it's just not realistic. I can't give you a cut and dry answer for how long in advance your kind of cutoff decision deadline should be, as it will depend on lots of factors, like the number of volunteers you have willing to help, for sure. But if it were me, I probably wouldn't plan for it to be any closer than 2 weeks before. You'll need lots of time to get resources together, to make sure your Safer Church plan is all set, to make sure volunteers have sufficient training, make sure you have that person who's going to be on the restriction duty kind of thing, and lots of other things that I'm probably forgetting. And it's important to make sure you do everything you can that none of those pieces get dropped, and to make sure that everyone's on the same page about what's happening, including campers and parents. And that stuff all just takes time. And if you want to be open to the possibility of moving some or all of the camp to in-person, depending on restrictions, it's important to just be clear with parents from the outset. That way it's not a surprise to them. And I didn't really think about this when I was doing the notes, but so that's all if you're planning online or not in person, and potential comes for it to be in person. If you're planning an in-person thing and something changes, there's an outbreak in your community, restrictions get closed in a little bit more, that will require some changes too. So that's worth doing some advanced thinking about. How can we take what's going to be in person and do it differently if we need to? Hopefully it won't happen, but it's better to be prepared for it and not need it than to be stuck and not able to do anything. Okay, I've got some resources to talk about. And I did put together a little kind of slideshow with some pictures for this. But before I pull that up, I think it's important to say that whatever resource you use, especially if you're going to offer it as something that children can do on their own, it's really important that you or someone thoroughly review the content to make sure that it doesn't contain anything inappropriate or that isn't in line with what we would teach in person. The resources that I'll talk about, I've taken a quick look at them. And I chose them for this because they look pretty good to me, but I have not done that deep dive. So please don't take these recommendations as a complete seal of approval. Don't hear me say, run with these, they're golden. Take them more as guidance, pointing you in kind of a maybe right direction. Hopefully that disclaimer was effective and you're not just going to take a little soundbite of me saying that they're great. If you do need some help making sense of how to review these resources more closely, let me know. I'd love to talk more about that. I'd love to send you some guidance on how to do it or offer whatever support you need in particular. Okay, gonna try to pull up my thing, see if I can do a lot of things at once. Okay. I'm trying to be too fancy. This is my okay. Here we go. Oh, sorry, I should have opened this before. So proceed with cautious enthusiasm. So when you look at these resources or whatever resources you find more closely, be really enthusiastic. It's okay to be really excited. It'll be more fun if you're excited about what you're looking at. But do take the time to look closely at them before you commit to them. Yeah, they look good, but I haven't been giving a close look. Okay, so Handprints of Faith is a prepackaged online program. It's put together by an Episcopal church, which is an Anglican church in Dallas, Texas. It explores the stories of different people from the Bible who left the handprints of their faith by trusting God even when things were difficult. So I thought that was pretty timely for right now. All of their stuff isn't available yet, but they're going to have videos to help lead children through the stories each week. And it looks on their website like all the stuff is free. And they've got guidebooks that contain crafts and their supply list for each week. So this would really be easily done as an almost entirely online thing, and you wouldn't even need to record your own videos. So you could kind of send things to parents, and they could go through it entirely on their own. If you wanted to do some of that in-person support, you could put together kits with the supplies needed for each week. But if that's not something possible where you are, sending out the videos and the guidebooks is a really solid thing. Just gonna have some water. And as I said before, I'm gonna include all the links to these resources in the email that I send out. That's Handprints of Faith. The next one is called Summer Activity Pack, and it's something that you can print and distribute. So this is another free download. It contains a resource called Water of Baptism, Water of Life. I practiced saying that a lot of times so that I would get it right. And it's kind of two books in one. The other is selections from Building Faith Brick by Brick. So Water of Baptism, Water of Life is an exploration of our baptismal covenant through water stories from the Bible. And those stories are found in the Building Faith Brick by Brick part. And Building Faith Brick by Brick is a kind of a broader curriculum that uses Lego to explore stories, which is really kind of cool. And I have a book on Building Faith Brick by Brick. So if you want to ignore everything else that I say and send me an email that says, can you send me that book so that I can give stuff to my people? That's also okay. Anyway, so the Summer Activity Pack is something that you could print off and distribute to families to use what works for them. And you could do Zoom check-ins to connect with kids and talk about what they've done, or lots of other possibilities with the kinds of things that I've talked about before. So this is another pretty hands-off possibility. Most of the ones that I'm going to talk about are at their core pretty hands-off, but have a lot of potential to do in-person stuff if you wanted to. So VBS for Backyards is the next one, and it's intergenerational and offline. This one isn't free, but it's basically all set and ready to go for you. It's designed to happen entirely offline, and the people who put it together did that in recognition that some folks just spend a lot of time in front of screens these days, and especially because this is designed to be intergenerational. They thought that creating a way for families to spend time together that wasn't screen-based would be valuable. So if that sounds good to you, this is definitely worth checking out. They give you a craft supply list, which makes it really easy to gather things, and lots of their crafts are based on stuff that you would already have at home. There's a sticker chart that you can put on your fridge to keep track of your progress. The people who created the resource, as I said, all the kind of content is offline, but they do create and kind of, I think, monitor a Facebook group for the people in your community so they can connect with one another there. And the VBS for Backyards people send out automated emails with the stuff for your people to do. It's weekly, I guess I didn't say that, so they send it out each week. And they've got different craft options for each week and different games that, so you can kind of pick and choose what works for you. And the next one is another one that isn't free. It's Illustrated Ministry. And it's called a Compassion Camp, is really flexible and adaptable. So even though it's not free, I included this because Illustrated Ministry, lots of parishes here have used some of their stuff in different ways. I went for a walk down my street the other day, and so throughout this pandemic, Illustrated Ministry has been sending out a few resources each week just to kind of help people, encourage them, whatever. And they sent out some Pentecost coloring pages, and I saw them hanging up in someone's window. It was very exciting. I wanted to like knock on their door and say, hey, I looked at that. And then I thought that's probably not okay right now, but it still is really exciting. So what more can I tell you about them? There's a sample session from this, a complete session available on their website to download, and it looks really, really great. The whole program is centered on compassion for others, for ourselves, and for the world. It's an at-home virtual VBS geared towards primary to grade 5 kids, and they have some activities specifically for preschool age kids as well. It's designed to be really, really flexible. So with all those kinds of flexible options that I talked about earlier, stuff online together, stuff that you do at home independently, has ideas for mission opportunities built in. And I think most of these, for sure this one, like Illustrated Ministry put this together in a couple of weeks, knowing there's a pandemic on and people need something. So when it says mission opportunities, it's taking into consideration all of the things that you need to take into consideration about the current time that we're in. There's music as part of it. There's a communal art project, so you distribute pieces of a thing that everyone does independently, and then you bring it all together to create something even while we're apart. And one really great thing about this Compassion Camp is that Illustrated Ministry created this Facebook group for people who had questions about it, and I think moving forward, they just launched the program today for people to be able to download, for people who are doing the program to ask questions about or share experiences of how things are going and that kind of thing. The Facebook group is really great. And even if you don't use their content, there's lots of really good and creative ideas for how to do different day camp sorts of things. So I would certainly encourage you to click the link to this, even if you have no intention of buying their thing, and check out the group and see what you can find there. Don't tell them in the group that I told you could go there, even if you didn't want to give them any money. But yeah, there's lots of really, really good stuff in there. And some of the other programs have things like that too. So certainly check those out. So the last resource on my list is PWRDF Encounters. This is a resource that is still being put together. So I don't have a ton of details on it yet, but what I've seen of it is really, really great. It's being put together by the, oh man, I should have double checked what her job title is, the youth engagement staff person for PWRDF. Her name is Sue, and she used to be my boss when I worked just for a camp. So she knows lots about doing camps, and she's working with the Youth Council of the Primates Fund to put this together. So young people from all across the country are having input into this, which is really cool. So here's the scoop of what it is from them. PWRDF is working to bring you the Encounters VBS as an online resource in both text and video form. The text will be available by mid-June, and the videos will be rolled out towards the end of June. So that text stuff should be available soon. This resource includes sacred stories, PWRDF partner stories, art, science, and meditation. So lots of great stuff to engage, help people engage in lots of different ways. I think sometimes lots of the programs that I talked about were pretty art heavy. And I feel really excited about this, that it has science, that it has meditation, kind of other ways of engaging with things as part of it. Okay, so that was not a comprehensive list of possibilities of resources that you could use, but it was a quick rundown of some good stuff that I found. And that is the end of my content. So anybody have any questions? Kristen, anything happening?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. So think really hard and come up with some questions, and you can drop them in. Hillary, Laura, Kristen, any of you have any thoughts to add while people think?
I could throw out a game if you're doing something that, so it works for a lot of ages, and it's, just call it museum. It's super easy. And the kids can distance themselves in a room because they're all statues in a museum. And as the leader, you turn your back and you announce what museum you're entering. So you say, I'm now entering the dinosaur room. And then you count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And when you turn around, the kids are supposed to be frozen like dinosaurs. So it's a fun game. They separate it out. They can suggest rooms to you, but you can also do it with things like, okay, we're all in we're going to be the statues of the people when they saw Moses part the Red Sea. So I want to see what their faces look like. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then you can look at them and see, and it can generate discussion. They hold their position, but I thought, wow, this is a really good social distancing activity if you find yourself in an opportunity to gather with young people. Teenagers like it too.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think like obviously that would work super well to keep good distance. It also would work really well on a Zoom call.
You actually could. I actually was thinking the same thing. It's like totally easy to do with Zoom. Another thing that I thought was really useful on a Zoom call that someone did, because I kind of like reflective activities, which are harder with the younger kids, but the age I normally work with is older. But give them a timeline. So if you're talking about something or giving them a story, say, okay, you have 1 minute to find something in your house that you think represents how you feel about that story.
Mhm.
or something that came out of it. And then instead of being seated all the time, it gets them up, engaged for a little bit, and then they got something. It's like a show and tell.
Yeah.
They have something to share. So that's all I got for tonight.
Oh, those are great. Thanks, Laura.
One of the things I was thinking that's one of the pros, or just a thing that you can more easily do on Zoom, or I guess in Facebook Live, they could engage with it in the chat. Like, utilize the fact that they're at home. Like at our VBS, we usually had a day, usually our pajama day, when you bring your favorite stuffy. That's definitely a no-go in, times of pandemic, because the germs would be transferred through taking them different places. But you could say tomorrow when we sign in, bring your favorite stuffy, and then have that games or conversation, or have different themes every day. On Wednesday, bring something from the kitchen, bring something you don't know what it's for, and they bring a whisk or something that I wouldn't know what to cook with. So just, there's ways of engaging with your environment that way.
Yeah, there are always all kinds of things when you're at a day camp that kids are like, oh, at my house we have bloop, bloop, bloop. And it is a really cool opportunity to, instead of saying, oh, well, too bad we're here. Lots of those things, if they're safe and appropriate and good boundaries. If you hear someone say, oh, in my house, our bathroom is blah, 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 that you're going to want to shut that down pretty hard and fast. But if someone's talking about their dog or what it looks like out their window, like those are things that we wouldn't get to do normally. So yeah, that's cool. This is my favorite stuffy.
Oh!
It makes a very scary roar sound, so I won't do it. But it just happens to be by
I don't like that one.
Okay, I don't see any questions popping in, so I just have a couple kind of concluding thoughts. The first is that if you have questions later, I'd be really happy to hear them. So you can send me an email anytime. I only work a couple of hours a week, so it might take me a little bit longer than normal to get back to you, but I promise that I will. There are some resources that I have, some in my office at home and some in my office in the city. So if there is something in particular that you're looking for, you can send me an email, and if I have it, I'm really happy to send it to you. Some books with, like, I'm struggling to think of a single one. So Hillary, if you can think of any other things that we have, like games that you can play to think about things in different ways, or how to do art that is more than just cut this out and glue it to this and magic, you've got a flower pot. How to think creatively, how to do science stuff, how to whatever. There's lots of things. And I have some Sunday school kits as well, which I think some of them are pretty easy to do as a distribute around thing. Like, it just is a prepackaged story and whatever. And a resource that I am really happy to share is this Zoom account. So the Youth and Family Ministry team of the diocese has its own Zoom account. It's not the one that gets used for diocesan council and all of those things. And some parishes have used it for stuff, but I'm really happy for it to be used as much as possible. If this could be in use 24 hours a day, it would be terrible boundaries, but because someone would be up when they should be sleeping. But I'd be really happy to share with you, and I have a calendar where I kind of keep track of what's happening to make sure that things aren't overlapping. So if you want to use Zoom and your parish doesn't have an account, let me know, and we can see what we can do to make that happen. I feel like I had another big, brilliant concluding point to share with you, and I have lost it. Oh, right. If you're gonna do something, I'd really love to hear about it. I'd love to hear about it. You can write about it in the Diocesan Times. They love stuff. They love stuff about camp in particular. But if you let me know about it, especially in advance, I can connect you with other people who are doing similar stuff. It's great to join a Facebook group and be able to glean things or ask questions from other people elsewhere. But sometimes it's nice to connect with someone who is in a pretty similar context to you. Even if you're in PEI and they're in Nova Scotia, I bet you're going to have a lot of things in common. So I'd love to hear about it beforehand. If you forget, I still would really love to hear about it afterwards. I really love camp, and I love to hear people's stories of camp. So yeah, please share what you have going on. Okay, this is the real last thing. I am notorious for saying one last thing 100 times before something ends. My real last thing is that the Connect team is really actively working on figuring out what we can offer people to help encourage them, support them, equip them to better engage with young people, with children, youth, and families in their communities. So if there's something that you think would really help you, that you'd love to have a webinar or like a Zoom meeting kind of conversational workshop on, let me know and we'll see what we can do. I was going to give you some examples of things that you might send me, but I don't want to because I want to know what you want and not just you echo back my thoughts to me. So thank you so much, Laura and Kristen and Hillary, for paneling it up with me tonight. And thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in. I hope that some of this stuff has been helpful to you. And I hope that you have a really great summer connecting with the children, with the young people in your life, whatever that looks like this year. And I look forward to hearing all about it. Have a great night. Talk to you guys soon.